If you haven't seen my video on the history of the first decade, make sure to check that one out before you start this. The link will be in the description. This is a compilation of the Yearly Histories series on my channel, where we cover the history of the world every year. Let's get started. In the Roman Empire, the imperial army finally makes its return to Germania after the disastrous battle of the Teutoburg Forest in 9 AD against the local Germanic tribes led by the former Roman ally Arminius. Tiberius was sent by Emperor Augustus to immediately respond to the situation and stabilize the area. This year, in the spring, Tiberius makes his move and crosses the Rhine. Quote, Tiberius felt sufficiently confident to venture rather tentatively across the Rhine, using the same scorched earth tactics he had employed in putting down the Illyrian revolt, but he never advanced very far toward the Weser. It was painfully clear to any experienced observer that the Roman army was far too short of trained soldiers to take any unnecessary risks. Besides, Tiberius had no intention of acting rashly and opening himself up to unflattering comparisons with the late Quintilius Varus." Unquote. Arminius, with his army, remains behind the east bank of the Rhine and refrains from confronting Tiberius. This results in a stalemate taking place in southern Germania. In the northern and eastern parts, in which the Romans could not reach, the Germanic tribes begin to migrate into vacant territory and establish themselves more solidly. In Rome itself, an edict is issued affecting an empire-wide ban on divinatory practices, especially astrology. The edict requires any consultation between a customer and a practitioner to be conducted with at least one third-party witness present, and bans inquiry into anyone's death. Moving east to the Parthian Empire and its client kingdoms, the clashes between King Vonones I and the rebellious king Artabanus of Media Atropatene continue. Although the fighting is ongoing, it seems things may be coming to a head very soon. In China, a severe natural disaster occurs. The Yellow River has been the most important center of civilization for all major dynasties in ancient China. This famous river is known by the Chinese for its tendency to overflow and flood the surrounding Great Plain, where most of the populated settlements in the Qin dynasty can be found. Quote, in the year 11 CE, the surging river again breached the dikes and unleashed another new arm along the northern edge of the Shandong Peninsula. Thousands of people drowned in the ensuing deluge, and millions more were rendered homeless and forced to flee the devastated provinces. Unquote. This event begins an enormous mass migration of Chinese inhabitants from the densely populated northern regions around the Yellow River to the more sparsely populated southern lands. Naturally, after a catastrophe of this scale, a massive famine strikes the Chinese people, made worse by large locust swarms and droughts in other parts of the empire. Wang Mang is powerless to respond to this devastation and following disorder. A very important philosophical concept from China that we have not mentioned yet in this series is the mandate of heaven. Starting in the Zhou dynasty just under 1,000 years ago in China, this mandate has asserted that the ruler or emperor's legitimacy is granted by a divine source. This mandate justifies the emperor's authority, stating that he is the son of heaven and must govern justly and wisely. If the ruler fails to fulfill these duties, the mandate can be withdrawn, leading to the ruler's overthrow and replacement by a more virtuous leader. A situation such as this seems prime for Wang Mang's mandate of heaven to begin to dwindle. Checking in on the status of Wang Mang's reforms, he decides to reverse another one. In 9 AD, he prohibited the purchase and sale of private slaves, but this year, he walks back that decision. The aristocracy of China is vehemently against their source of cheap labor drying up. Wang Mang decides to balance out the situation by instituting a heavy tax on slave owners. Returning to the military front, we mentioned last year how Wang Mang declared war on the Xiongnu tribes in the north and ordered the conscription and mobilization of 300,000 troops to the northern border regions. This year, as the army amasses, it takes a serious toll on the resources of the area. Although Wang Mang spread the force into 12 locations along the northern border, the locals are still experiencing significant hardships and draining of their resources. Wang Mang has a plan to divide and conquer the Xiongnu Confederacy. Shan Yu is a title used by the leaders of the Xiongnu and other nomadic tribes in the area, the current one being a man named Wu Zhu Liu. His younger half-brother, Xian, subscribes more to the pro-China persuasion, so Wang Mang decides to prop him up with financial aid, and he is declared to be the counter Shan Yu. This causes the supporters of his half-brother to become angry, and Xian is forced to surrender to him. Xian finds a way to escape, and he flees to Qin Dynasty territory. Starting this year, over in the northwestern border regions of the Roman Empire, Tiberius has been doing his part to stabilize the region in the aftermath of the Roman defeat in the Teutoburg Forest at the hands of the local Germanic tribes. As matters in the region are settling, Tiberius hands over the reins to his nephew Germanicus to manage the Roman army in Germania, and he returns to Rome. Since the various Germanic tribes have consolidated their newly liberated territory over the last couple years, it would take a much larger offensive at this point than the Romans are capable of to strike back and take control of their former territory deep in Germania. Augustus is 73 years old in this year, and he has been pondering the future. As Tiberius returns to Rome, he is elevated to the position of co-imperator by Emperor Augustus himself. Augustus will still be the #1 authority in the Roman Empire, but this grants Tiberius an even higher position than being just the designated heir. This decision further consolidates his future succession and leaves no doubt that Tiberius will be the sole future head of the empire. Over in the Black Sea coastal town of Tomis, the banished Roman poet Ovid completes another of his famous works in approximately this year. It's the cursed poem called Ibis. Ovid claims that his poetry up to this point has been harmless, but now he is going to use his abilities to hurt his enemy. He uses a dazzling array of mythic stories to curse and attack an unspecified enemy who is harming him in Rome while Ovid is in exile. In the Parthian Empire, actions from the past 2 years come to a head in the conflict between King Vonones I of the Parthian Empire and his client king of Media Atropatene, Artabanus. The situation has turned further in Artabanus' favor in the last year, as his forces have been winning in their clashes with those of Vonones. This year, Vonones I is forced to vacate the throne and flee to the Roman client state of Armenia. The current monarchs in Armenia, Tigranes V and his queen Erato, are overthrown, and the Romans grant Vonones I the title of King of Armenia. The Armenian public will surely not like this decision, as they themselves have overthrown foreign leaders in the past. Now back in Parthia, Artabanus ascends to the throne as King Artabanus II, and he immediately disputes the authority of Vonones I as King of Armenia. Artabanus II likely claims ancestry from the Arsacid dynasty, but the Arsacid nobility in Parthia preferred Vonones as he was more Hellenized or influenced by Greek culture, as opposed to the supporters of Artabanus II, who are more under Oriental or Eastern influence. Moving to China, Wang Mang has to roll back more of his radical reforms that he has implemented since taking control of China and becoming the new emperor in 9 AD. He finds that many of his land reforms are unenforceable. If you remember, in order to combat the rampant poverty of most Chinese inhabitants, and ownership of land being concentrated in the hands of a few rich families, he decided to make major changes. He implemented a new revolutionary land distribution system, ordering that all land in the empire will now legally become the empire's property, for him to dole out as he sees fit. He also decreed that all able-bodied men were to receive a standard allotment of land. Families with more land than his new formula was to allow were to distribute their surplus land to land-poorer relatives and neighbors. This all came crashing down, as the imperial government was not able to enforce these new rules, as the aristocrats, who were supposed to uphold these laws, clearly were being hurt financially by them and had no incentive to continue the facade. Tensions continue to increase between the Qin dynasty and the Xiongnu Confederacy in the north. Wang Mang has recently been meddling in their affairs of state, as he gave financial backing to Xian, the pro-China half-brother of the Chanyu, or leader of the Xiongnu. Xian was able to flee to Qin dynasty territory. This year, Wang Mang turns his attention to another Xiongnu prince. He decides to execute a different prince who has been in captivity in the Qin capital of Chang'an. It seems like the tensions between these two powers will continue to increase further. In other military matters, the Qin Imperial Army defeats the Goguryeo Army in the northeast. The Goguryeo are a Korean kingdom situated in the north of their peninsula and have had scattered clashes with the Chinese people for some time now. Wang Mang sent them a request for aid in their ongoing conflict with the Xiongnu, but King Yuri of Goguryeo decided to attack them instead. It does not go well for them. In the imperial capital of Rome, Emperor Augustus, who is 74 years old in this year, is struggling to keep up with the rigorous duties required by the head of an empire of Rome's size and scope. Quote, Augustus had long ago stopped attending public banquets and most other official ceremonies. He excused himself from regular meetings of the Senate and asked that senators kindly not bother him at home either. Unquote. It seems like this legendary aging emperor has resigned himself to his fate and does not have much time left, but he can feel at ease as all succession plans for Rome have been ironed out in the past years. After naming his adopted son Tiberius as co-imperator the previous year, he can find solace in the fact that the empire should remain in capable hands, though he surely has had some reservations in the past, considering their rocky relationship over the years. Over to the Black Sea coastal town of Tomis, where the banished Roman poet Ovid resides. He publishes books 1 to 3 of his work called the Epistolae ex Ponto. The epistolae are each addressed to a different friend and focus more desperately than the Tristia, another poem, on securing his recall from exile. The poems mainly deal with requests for friends to speak on his behalf to members of the imperial family, discussions of writing with friends, and descriptions of life in exile. Over in China, Wang Mang continues to deal with foreign threats along the northern border, with their ongoing conflict with the Xiongnu and their successful clash against the kingdom of Goguryeo last year. This year, yet another adversary enters the fray, this time in Shiyu, also known as the Western regions. This territory has been under the control of the Chinese empires for around 150 years at this point, and were incorporated into the fold under the reign of the great Emperor Wu of the Han Dynasty. The town of Karashar rises up and kills the Chinese protector general of Shiyu. As the Qin are dealing with other enemies right now, they are unable to respond to this treacherous act for the time being. Emperor Wang Mang's rival, the Chanyu, or leader of the Xiongnu Confederacy, Wu Zhuliu, dies in this year. He is replaced by Xian, the Xiongnu prince who has allied with Wang Mang in previous years and has been living in the capital of Chang'an. He takes the name Wu Lei as he ascends to the top position in the Confederacy. This is a fantastic development for China, as the Xiongnu have been a constant thorn in their side, and now peace is established between the two great powers of the East, for the time being at least. We begin this year with the results of a census of the Roman Empire ordered by Emperor Augustus. This is the third of its kind under his watch, the first being in 28 BC, the final year of Rome as a republic, reporting a population of 4,063,000. The second census was undertaken in 8 BC, showing a population of 4,233,000 inhabitants. Finally, this year, the third census reports a population of 4,937,000, showing an increase of almost 1 million people over the course of his time as emperor. The elderly Emperor Augustus, now 75 years old, decides to leave Rome and spend the rest of the sweltering summer in his villa located in the southern Italian countryside. But first, he pays a visit to his exiled grandson, Agrippa Posthumus, on the island of Planitia. He makes his peace with his former heir, whose brutish behavior forced Augustus's hand to strip him of his titles and send him off into exile in 7 AD. While continuing his journey to the south, he catches a chill and develops a debilitating weakness in his intestines. He recuperates for 4 days on the island of Capri before continuing his journey and arrives in Neapolis, where he meets up with Tiberius. After moving on, he still hasn't fully recovered from his recent sickness, but arrives in Nola. There, his health takes a turn for the worse and reaches a critical point. Tiberius moves quickly to join the emperor at his bedside, where Augustus grants Tiberius his blessing and mutters a few final words to him. Days later, after saying his goodbyes to his wife Livia, Augustus, the most powerful man in the world and the first emperor of Rome, sheds his mortal coil and passes on into eternity. Just before passing, Augustus declares, quote, "I found Rome a city of bricks and left it a city of marble," unquote. We will talk about the life and legacy of this titanic figure later in the video for our In Memoriam segment and give the namesake of this channel a proper send-off. Immediately, Livia, the wife of Augustus and mother of Tiberius, decides to keep his death a secret for some time until she's able to ensure the loyalty of the Praetorian Guard to Tiberius. Within days of Augustus's death, the former heir, Agrippa Posthumus, is killed by the commander of the guard on his island of exile. Suspiciously, Augustus's daughter, the also exiled Julia the Elder, also dies. There is no evidence that Livia nor Tiberius had a hand in either death, but that does not stop suspicious rumors from spreading. Once the news of Augustus's death proliferates, the succession process begins. His body is transported back to Rome, where the funeral events kick off. The Senate declares that the 8th month of the year shall now bear the name of Augustus. He is also deified, along with many other elaborate rituals being performed in his name. The funeral is an extravagant and dazzling display. Quote, "Augustus's body, in a coffin covered with a cloth of gold and purple, was laid upon a couch of ivory and gold. Atop the coffin rested a wax effigy of the dead man, dressed in the traditional victory garb of a Roman conqueror," unquote. A vast crowd looks on to watch Tiberius deliver the eulogy on the steps of the Temple of Jupiter, making flattering statements such as, "We all understand that even if all mankind were gathered together, they could not pronounce a tribute worthy of him, and, so far from feeling envious, that not one of you could equal him." His body is then carried out to the Campus Martius, where it is placed on top of a pyre and lit by torch. And so, there is a new emperor of Rome. Tiberius accepts the position in a final act of obedience to his adopted father, Augustus. But after serving as co-imperator for the last 2 years, he starts to find the spark of life at the top is already beginning to fizzle within him. Tiberius speaks with the prominent politicians of Rome after the funeral and explains to them that he intends to take more of a step back with his governing and letting them take on more of the burden, stating, quote, "A state which could rely on so many distinguished personages ought not to concentrate the supreme power in the hands of one man. The task of government would be more easily carried out by the combined efforts of a greater number," unquote. The Senate believes he is taking a page out of Augustus's book and feigning reluctance. Tiberius has a reputation for keeping a reserved demeanor and not displaying his real feelings, but his words are true in this case. Once word of Augustus's death spreads to the surrounding provinces of the empire, multiple mutinies of the imperial army break out, with one in Germania and one in Illyricum. Over the rigorous military conditions they live under, the late Emperor Augustus extending the term of service for soldiers from 16 years to 20 years, and the loot drying up with scarce plunder finding them in Germania and Illyricum as of late. The ringleaders of these rebellions believe this time of transition is perfect to secure more pay and better conditions. In Illyricum, the rabble sacks nearby villages and releases all prisoners held in the area. The new emperor, Tiberius, an experienced and capable military commander in his own right, does not act rashly and give in to their demands. Tiberius decides to send his son Drusus and the new praetorian prefect Sejanus to respond to the uprising. Before continuing in Illyricum, we need to mention one of the first acts undertaken by Emperor Tiberius. It's the appointment of Lucius Aelius Sejanus as praetorian prefect. Sejanus's father, Lucius Strabo, is already the current praetorian prefect, but they will work jointly in this venture. The praetorian prefect's role is the commander of the Praetorian Guard, the official bodyguard of the Emperor of Rome. They also work as escorts for high political officials and are bodyguards for the senior officers of the Roman legions. The Praetorian Guard was established by Emperor Augustus in 27 BC as his personal security escort, and they've been an important institution ever since. And so, Drusus arrives in Illyricum with his army, and the gods bestow great luck upon him instantly. A lunar eclipse takes place overnight, and the superstitious rebels take it as a sign of the god Jupiter's divine judgment. Just like that, the flame of rebellion dies out, and Drusus has the ringleaders executed. Now, over to the rebellion in Germania, where Germanicus has no such fortune. 4 legions rise up and kill their officers. Germanicus finally arrives and restores some semblance of order with a speech reminding them of their service to the divine Augustus. The mutinous troops are not satisfied with this message and shout out for better conditions. All of Germanicus's attempts fail, and he is taken away by his entourage before the situation gets further out of hand. Germanicus decides to cave in to their demands and declares the immediate discharge of all veterans who have served more than 16 years and pays their demobilization bonuses from his own funds. But the troops suspect the Senate will not agree to these conditions, and the mutiny continues. Worried about escalating violence, Germanicus sends his wife and child away, but the rebels do not let them leave. Finally, Germanicus erupts with anger and delivers a ruthless speech, reaming out the troops, shouting, "You men who have used your fortifications and weapons to blockade your emperor's son can hardly be called soldiers." The passionate words of their commander causes a change of heart in the soldiers, and they flip to his side, rounding up the ringleaders themselves and executing them after a makeshift tribunal. And so, order is restored to 2 of the 4 mutinous legions, but there still remains the other 2 at Vetera Castra along the Rhine. Germanicus sends word ahead, saying that if they punish the leaders of the uprising themselves, the matter will be considered closed. A brutal massacre takes place in the camps, and horrific scenes ensue, where men who considered each other friends just a day ago turn on one another in a violent fury. As Germanicus enters the camps, he acts horrified by what took place. Attempting to solidify the loyalty of his troops, Germanicus orders raids on the Germanic tribe called the Marsi, located on the upper Ruhr River. The Roman army massacres villages of the Marsi and plunder the surrounding territory. Territorial changes take place along the Roman border in the east, as they annex the client state of Palmyra into the Roman Empire as part of the province of Syria. In China, the aboriginal tribes that reside in the Aichu Commandery in the south rebel. The unrest in the territory has been continuous since the Han conquering of the region over 100 years ago. Wang Mang dispatches a new governor of the commandery to pacify the rebels. Now it's time for In Memoriam, where we look back on the lives of prominent figures who died in the year. Emperor Augustus was born as Gaius Octavius in 63 BC in Rome. His father, also Gaius Octavius, was a military tribune and eventually the proconsul of Macedonia, but died when Octavius was just 4 years of age. In his teenage years, he was elected to the College of the Pontiffs, containing the highest-ranking priests of the Roman state religion. In 46 BC, Octavius's mother gave him permission to join his maternal great-uncle, Julius Caesar, on his campaign in Hispania against the forces of Pompey during their civil war. This was derailed for a time when he fell ill, something that would occur frequently in the sickly Roman's life, despite all he accomplished. But he recovered and made it across enemy territory to Caesar, an act which impressed him greatly. When Julius Caesar was assassinated on the Ides of March in 44 BC, the 18-year-old Octavius was posthumously adopted by the dictator of Rome himself, since Caesar had no living legitimate children under Roman law, and the man now known as Octavian inherited 2/3 of Caesar's immense estate. This decision changed the course of Octavian's life and history itself. Octavian began to bolster his personal forces with Caesar's veteran legionaries, gathering support by emphasizing his status as heir to Caesar. Tensions began to rise between the Senate and young Octavian on one side, and Caesar's former right-hand man, Mark Antony, on the other in the time immediately after the assassination. After 2 failed clashes against senatorial forces in northern Italy, Mark Antony retreated to Gaul. Relations between Octavian and the Senate began to sour after they had heaped more praise on Decimus Brutus over Octavian for these victories. In October 43 BC, Octavian formed a powerful alliance with Mark Antony and Marcus Aemilius Lepidus, known as the Second Triumvirate. The triumvirs then set in motion proscriptions, in which between 130 and 300 senators and 2,000 equites were branded as outlaws and deprived of their property, and for those who failed to escape, their lives. After the Battle of Philippi in 42 BC, Octavian and Mark Antony were victorious, and the main conspirators of the assassination of Julius Caesar, Brutus and Cassius, committed suicide. Mark Antony criticized Octavian for handing over his military control to his best friend, Marcus Agrippa. After Philippi, the Roman Republic was divided amongst the members of the Second Triumvirate. Gaul and the province of Hispania were placed in the hands of Octavian. In 40 BC, Mark Antony left Egypt and his new love affair with Cleopatra to attack Octavian's forces at Brundisium in Italy, but they later reconciled. Octavian turned his attention to Sextus Pompeius, the son of Pompey, who had recently taken control of Sicily and was blocking grain shipments to Rome. Sextus Pompeius's troops and fleet were no match for Marcus Agrippa, and he defeated them soundly. The relationship between Octavian and his second triumvirate partner Lepidus soured when Lepidus claimed Sicily for himself, but his troops defected to Octavian, causing Lepidus to surrender to him. While Mark Antony was in the east campaigning against the Parthians, Octavian began to turn the Romans at home against him, proclaiming he was becoming less Roman with his partnership with Cleopatra and his years spent in Egypt. This worked, and in 32 BC the Senate officially revoked Antony's powers as consul and declared war on Cleopatra's regime in Egypt. Marcus Agrippa was able to defeat Mark Antony and Cleopatra's army with major victories such as at the Battle of Actium, and they committed suicide together while on the run in Greece in 30 BC. After Actium, Octavian was in a position to rule the entire republic under an unofficial principate, but he had to achieve this through incremental power gains. He did so by courting the Senate and the people while upholding the republican traditions of Rome, appearing that he was not aspiring to dictatorship or monarchy. Marching into Rome, Octavian and Agrippa were elected as consuls by the Senate. Octavian made a show of returning full power to the Roman Senate and relinquished his control of the Roman provinces and their armies. Under his consulship, however, the Senate had little power in initiating legislation by introducing bills for senatorial debate. Octavian was no longer in direct control of the provinces and their armies, but he retained the loyalty of active duty soldiers and veterans alike. In 27 BC, Octavian became the first emperor of Rome, with the Senate bestowing the title of Augustus onto him, meaning to increase or to augment. The Senate also confirmed his position as Princeps Senatus, which originally meant the member of the Senate with the highest precedence, but in this case, it became an almost regnal title for a leader who is first in charge. Over the course of his time as emperor, he accumulated many prestigious political positions and titles, such as tribune, censor, and pater patriae, meaning father of the country, until he was virtually unchallenged. By the end of his time in power, his imperial army had conquered such territories as Egypt, northern Hispania, the Alpine regions of Raetia and Noricum, Illyricum, and Pannonia. Although the disastrous defeat of the Roman army at the Teutoburg Forest by the Germanic tribes in 9 AD put a stain on his martial legacy. Augustus failed to secure his succession at first, as he passed through heirs such as his grandchildren, Gaius and Lucius Caesar and Agrippa Postumus, until finally landing on Tiberius, who he adopted and eventually named sole heir. Emperor Augustus leaves a profound legacy behind, founding a powerful and stable empire from the embers of a fractured and devastated republic. Augustus established enduring institutions like the Praetorian Guard and initiated an era of relative peace known as the Pax Romana. Augustus's political genius, ability to delegate tasks to capable leaders, military successes, and ability to maintain order without repressive autocracy solidified his reputation as one of history's greatest rulers and established a standard to which all future emperors will be compared. We start this year off with Germanicus leading a Roman army across the Rhine to raid the Chatti and Cherusci tribes in Germania, and he catches them by surprise. Settlements are burned and non-combatants are slaughtered, as they did against the Marsi at the end of the previous year, after Germanicus managed to restore order to the mutinous troops stationed along the river. He even manages to capture a valuable prize, Thusnelda, the pregnant wife of Arminius, the man who led the collective Germanic tribes to crush the Romans in the Teutoburg Forest, causing the governor of Germania, Publius Quintilius Varus, to take his own life in shame. Germanicus leads the army east until reaching the site of the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest. Shattered shields, splintered spears, decayed corpses, and skulls nailed to tree trunks still remain even after 6 years. With a heavy heart, they bury the remains of their fallen comrades, and even managed to recapture the lost standard of the 19th Legion, whose soldiers were decimated by Arminius' troops. The standard is destroyed by the Romans, and they vow to never re-establish the 19th Legion again. Germanicus takes half of the army and returns to Roman territory. Arminius, in a frenzy of anger over the capture of his wife, takes this opportunity to attack the other half of the Roman army, who are moving across the trail known as the Pontus Longi, named after the long bridges which were constructed in the time in which they controlled this territory in order to pass across the harsh landscape. The Roman army, standing at around 30,000 strong, is stuck as they attempt to rebuild one of the bridges across the marshes. The trail gives the clash the name of the Battle at Pontus Longi, or the Long Bridge. This time, though, the Romans under the command of Aulus Caecina Severus are able to stand their ground and match the ferocious Germanic warriors. Under severe pressure, they're able to rebuild the bridge while sustaining heavy casualties and make it to the other side, where they set up camp to remain overnight. The next day, the Germanic warriors surround the camp and advance. The Romans fling open the doors between the fortified walls and charge at the tribesmen. They are able to beat them back. Although the Romans survive and cause their enemy to flee, the casualties are huge, with 1/3 of the Roman army falling in the battle and a large quantity of supplies being left behind. The Romans are finally able to withdraw back across the Rhine River, where they remain for the rest of the year. Back in Rome, the father of Sejanus and Praetorian prefect Lucius Caius Strabo dies, leaving Sejanus as the sole commander of the Praetorian Guard. Tiberius granted him the position last year as one of his first acts as emperor, and now he's quickly climbing the ladder of power in Rome. Political matters aside, the Tiber River in Rome floods. The historian Tacitus has this to say, quote, "The Tiber, swollen by continuous rains, flooded the level portions of the city. Its subsidence was followed by destruction of buildings and of life," unquote. We start off this year in the northwest, with the Roman commander Germanicus planning an ambitious seaborne invasion of Germania. Over the winter, the Romans worked constantly to construct a fleet of 1,000 ships for this endeavor. This is the third campaign season in a row in which Germanicus has led troops across the Rhine River, after raiding the Marsi, Chatae, and Cherusci, and capturing Thusnelda, the wife of Arminius, who has been a thorn in the side of the Romans in past years. Germanicus knows that Arminius has to respond to his vicious raids into Germanic territory and is looking to take him out once and for all. The fleet embarks from their side of the Rhine and exits to the North Sea. Once landing at the mouth of the Weser River, their armies meet at the Battle of Aetas to Viso. The Romans, with the Chauci tribe on their side, inflict a serious defeat on Arminius' army, wounding his uncle, Ingwimir, and Arminius himself. Thousands of fleeing tribesmen are cut down, and those who attempt to swim across the Weser are skewered by projectiles, while others simply drown. Tacitus has this to say, quote, "From 9 in the morning to nightfall, the enemy were slaughtered, and 10 miles were covered with arms and dead bodies, while there were found amid the plunder the chains which the Germans had brought with them for the Romans, as though the issue were certain. The soldiers on the battlefield hailed Tiberius as imperator, and raised a mound on which arms were piled in the style of a trophy, with the names of the conquered tribes inscribed beneath them," unquote. While licking their wounds, the sight of the insulting trophy constructed by the Romans enrages the Germanics, and they decide to attack again, thus beginning the Battle of the Angravarian Wall, as they launch an attack against the Romans positioned next to a wall of earthworks. The Romans under Germanicus are victorious yet again, and they capture the 2 remaining standards which were lost in the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest in 9 AD. After this second major victory, Germanicus is recalled back to his position on the Roman side of the Rhine by Emperor Tiberius himself. On the return journey back to the Roman camps, the fleet is met with hailstorms and a torrential downpour in the North Sea. Dozens of ships sink, men and horses drown, and those who are lucky enough to make it to shore are captured by their Germanic foes on their fleeting attempt to return to their home base. Germanicus is devastated by this sudden blow, and even reportedly offers to jump in and drown with his men in his grief. Nonetheless, Germanicus is now a hero to his men like never before, after finally avenging the infamous Battle of the Teutoburg Forest and humiliating Arminius through the campaigns of the past years. It's safe to say he now lives up to the name he inherited from his father of Germanicus for his own military exploits against the Germanic tribesmen. Moving east, in approximately this year, the exiled Roman poet Ovid completes another of his famous works. In his 9th year of exile, he completes Tristia III, describing the sadness of banishment in Tomis, and his reaction to finding out his works are banned in Rome. Over in China, Emperor Wang Mang believes he finally has the opportunity to deal with the rebels in Shiyu, or the western regions, who rose up in the town of Karashar and killed the Chinese protector general. He sends an expeditionary force, which makes its way west, and en route is ambushed, but not annihilated. The injured contingent still arrives at Karashar and massacres part of the population before returning to China. This seems to have sent a message to prevent any other towns located in the Tarim Basin from repeating the actions of before. This year, Germanicus returns to Rome as a conquering hero after 3 successful years raiding and campaigning across the Rhine River in Germania and handing multiple defeats to the Roman enemy Arminius and his army of Germanic tribesmen. His victories at the Battle of Aetas and the Battle of the Angevarian Wall last year crippled the capacity of the Germanics to cause additional trouble for the Romans for the time being. As he returns to the eternal city of Rome, he is awarded with a triumph, a spectacularly extravagant military parade held to honor a victorious Roman commander. Dozens of legends of the Republic, such as Scipio Africanus, Pompey, and Julius Caesar, have received triumphs in the past and regarded the event as necessary to solidify their names in the history books. Typically, during these events, you would see the victorious general parading through the streets of Rome in a lavish chariot, adorned in a purple toga and laurel crown, leading soldiers, captives, and spoils of war. Crowds would cheer as exotic animals, treasure, and representations of conquered territories were displayed, while musicians and priests accompanied the procession toward the Temple of Jupiter for sacrificial offerings. Now, Emperor Tiberius has a decision to make about what to do next with his triumphant nephew and adopted son, Germanicus, who is now at the height of his popularity. Does he allow him to remain in Rome and risk him outshining the less beloved emperor, or send him elsewhere? Tiberius ultimately decides to send him to the east to tour the provinces and begin to make preparations to lead a military campaign against the Parthian Empire, whose king Artabanus II had overthrown the prior king and friend of Rome, Vonones I, in 12 AD after a civil conflict, and ascended the throne himself. Artabanus II's priorities were not aligned with the Roman interests, and Vonones I ended up having to flee to Armenia, where the Romans aided his seizure of the throne there. Tiberius also elects to appoint the former consul, Gnaeus Calpurnius Piso, as governor of Syria in the east, which comes with the command of 4 legions, seemingly confirming his suspected motives of attempting to check the ever-growing popularity of his nephew. Piso was in the favor of the deceased Emperor Augustus and belonged to a powerful family who held staunch Republican views. Emperor Tiberius's choice seems to set the stage for a heated rivalry to develop between Germanicus and Piso, stemming from their ambitious personalities and contending mindsets. Also in the east, a ruinous earthquake strikes Anatolia, completely destroying the city of Sardis and several other surrounding cities. Tacitus describes it thusly, quote, "That same year 12 famous cities of Asia fell by an earthquake in the night, so that the destruction was all the more unforeseen and fearful, nor were there the means of escape usual in such a disaster, by rushing out into the open country, for their people were swallowed up by the yawning earth. Vast mountains, it is said, collapsed. What had been level ground seemed to be raised aloft, and fires blazed out amid the ruin. The calamity fell most fatally on the inhabitants of Sardis, and it attracted to them the largest share of sympathy." Unquote. Emperor Tiberius responds to the situation by promising financial aid in the form of 10 million sesterces and other fiscal exemptions. Closer to home, Tiberius puts his biological son, Drusus, in command of the legions in Illyricum. Drusus saw some prior success in the area in 14 AD after the death of Emperor Augustus, when some legions took the opportunity to rebel. As Drusus arrived to deal with the situation, a lunar eclipse took place, scaring the mutinous legions who mostly surrendered. Drusus had the ringleaders executed for their treachery. Trouble is brewing in another part of the empire this year. In North Africa, a recent deserter of the Roman army who is of Berber descent named Tacfarinas begins a revolt. He begins a guerrilla campaign at the head of a coalition of dissatisfied Berber and Musalamii tribesmen. He begins by launching an assault on the Limes Tripolitanus, a fortified zone protecting North African cities such as Leptis Magna. His band of marauders meets the locally stationed Roman army. There are mixed reports on whether the rebel or imperial army won this clash, but the event ends in Tacfarinas retreating with his army back into the surrounding deserts to continue his guerrilla campaign at a later date. These developments are troubling, as any disruptions to this area, well known for being one of Rome's main breadbaskets, could disrupt the grain supplies and lead to subsequent civil strife at home in the capital. Rome's borders are also growing in the east this year, as the Roman client king of Cappadocia and loyal ally Archelaus dies. Although he was liked by Augustus, he was an opponent to Tiberius, who felt that the king had snubbed him back when he was in exile on the island of Rhodes before becoming emperor. Archelaus has been experiencing financial trouble with his subjects and army, so Tiberius summons him to Rome. Upon arrival, he is accused of plotting against Rome, and the Senate condemns him to death. There, he dies, possibly committing suicide, and his kingdom is subsequently annexed into the Roman Empire's ever-expanding boundaries. The increase in tax revenue will help relieve the troubles in the eastern part of the empire. We mentioned how the repeated defeats of the Cherusci prince Arminius shattered the loyalty he once had from many of the tribes of Germania. This results in turmoil north of the Roman border as he attempts to regain a semblance of control in the face of his waning reputation. A civil war breaks out in Germania. The king of the Marcomanni tribe, Maroboduus, who has positive relations with Emperor Tiberius and remained neutral during the conflicts between the Romans and other Germanic tribes, faces the recovering army of Arminius himself. The battle is indecisive, but Maroboduus is forced to retreat with his contingent. This puts Maroboduus's right to rule as king in a precarious position. In China, Emperor Wang Mang is still having serious trouble dealing with the after effects of the catastrophic flooding of the Yellow River in the north in 11 AD. The flood devastated the majority peasant farmer inhabitants of the Qin dynasty and shattered Wang Mang's claim to the mandate of heaven, the divine right to rule. The empire has never truly recovered, and the severe famines which started 6 years ago have been constant. Several minor agrarian rebellions are ongoing, and even more major ones break out this year, but nothing that Wang Mang is unable to deal with quite yet. One of these rebellious movements, called Lu Lin, breaks out this year in the area surrounding the Shandong Peninsula, exacerbated by the poor living conditions and corruption of the local Qin bureaucracy. 7,000 to 8,000 peasants soon join the rebellion, and they begin to pillage surrounding villages for food. It's too soon to know whether Wang Mang can get the situation back under control and recover his own and his government's damaged reputation. Now it's time for In Memoriam, where we look back on the lives of prominent figures who died in the year. Livy, the famous Roman historian, dies this year at the age of 74 or 75. He is most known for his monumental work History of Rome, written in Latin between 27 and 9 BC. The work covered the period from the legends concerning the arrival of Aeneas and the refugees from the fall of Troy, to the city's founding in 753 BC, the expulsion of the kings, and establishment of the Republic in 509 BC, and down to Livy's own time, during the reign of Emperor Augustus. 35 of the whopping 142 books survive. Also this year, the prominent Roman poet Ovid passes away while still in exile in the Black Sea coastal town of Tomis. He is around the age of 60 years old. Ovid's published works include classics such as the Metamorphoses, the Ars Amatoria, and the Fasti. These poems captivated audiences with their wit, elegance, and exploration of love, myth, and transformation. His poetry shaped the literary traditions of the Roman world, and he was an immensely popular figure during his time in Rome. He was sent into exile by Emperor Augustus after he took issue with the substance of the poems, which clashed with his attempted moral reforms. Ovid's misfortune continued even after the death of Augustus, as Emperor Tiberius did not allow him to return to Rome. Tacfarinas begins this year by launching a series of lightning raids on Roman territory, destroying the villages he ransacks. He disappears into the desert before Roman forces can intervene, but with his confidence growing, he decides to besiege a Roman fort this time around. The Romans attempt to break the siege, but they are repelled by the Berber and Musalamii rebels. The imperial army then begins to break and flee, while the Roman commander rushes forward and is killed. In response to their cowardice, the soldiers that fled are gathered, and 1 in every 10 men are selected to be flogged to death in front of all the others. Looking east, where Germanicus finally arrives to tour the provinces and begins to plan an invasion of the Parthian Empire at the request of Emperor Tiberius. But being wary of the growing popularity of Germanicus, he also appointed Gnaeus Calpurnius Piso as governor of Syria last year, who in turn received control of 4 legions in the area. Germanicus is planning to take an army into Armenia to depose King Vonones I and replace him for reasons we will get to. But Germanicus was bequeathed with the title of Imperator as a victorious commander of Rome and is technically the superior to Governor Piso, so he orders Piso to grant him authority over 2 of his legions. Piso disrespectfully ignores the order, further increasing the tensions between these 2 rivals. Now back to the pressing matters concerning Vonones I in the Roman client kingdom of Armenia. The king of the Parthian Empire, Artabanus II, has been attempting to overthrow Vonones and replace him with his son, which the Romans did not approve of. Germanicus meets with the Parthian delegation to negotiate and stabilize their relationship. They come to an agreement wherein the Romans would be removing Vonones from the throne and replacing him with their preferred candidate, a Pontic prince named Zeno, who is very popular with the Armenian people, in contrast to the very unpopular Vonones. Meeting on an island in the Euphrates River, the Romans and Parthians ratify their new friendly relationship and quell their diplomatic tensions. The Romans then take Vonones into custody and move him to Syria, where he is held in conditions befitting a king, but make no final decision about his fate for the time being. Zeno is crowned in the Armenian city of Artaxata and in turn takes the regnal name of Artaxias III. The Armenian people are overjoyed to have a popular monarch for once, and Artaxias is heaped with lavish gifts and praise. In the Levant, in approximately this year, the Roman client and tetrarch of Galilee and Perea, Herod Antipas, orders the construction of the city of Tiberias, named after his overlord, the Roman Emperor Tiberius. The new city is located on the western shore of the Sea of Galilee and looks to be an additional settlement for the Jewish people. North of the Roman border, we carry on with the civil war among the Germanic tribes, which broke out the previous year between Arminius' confederation and Maroboduus' Marcomanni. Maroboduus is deposed by Catualda, a Marcomannic exile who has returned with a large force to take advantage of Maroboduus' weak position as king. Maroboduus is forced to flee to Italy, where Emperor Tiberius accepts him. Arminius is unable to take advantage of the situation, as he is unable to break through into Marcomannic territory, so the civil conflict ends in a stalemate. Picking up where we left off last year in China, Wang Mang is still attempting to deal with multiple agrarian rebellions at once, arising from the widespread famines plaguing the massive peasant population of China. A more concerning rebellion began last year as the Lulin rebels recruited around 8,000 peasants and began pillaging surrounding villages in the Shandong Peninsula for food. To make matters worse, an even more alarming movement than the Lulin rebellion emerges. A man named Fan Chong starts his own rebellion and is able to recruit 10,000 men to his cause. He selects Mount Tai in Shandong as his base of operations and forms an alliance with several leaders of other more minor agrarian rebellions. Wang Mang has been doing a less than satisfactory job responding to all of these uprisings thus far, but now he is forced to make a decisive move. He reacts by sending an imperial army of 100,000 men to deal with the civil strife. Anticipating this move, the rebels led by Fan Chong decide to paint their eyebrows red so they can distinguish between themselves and the Shin forces when the inevitable clash takes place, thus beginning the Red Eyebrows Rebellion. North of the Shin border, the Xiongnu Confederacy sees a change in leadership as their Chan Yu Wu Lei dies. He is succeeded by his half-brother, Huder Shi Daogao. Wu Lei was more friendly towards China than his previous counterparts, so we will see if the new Chan Yu will result in a reversion to the norm. Starting off the year, the Berber rebel Tacfarinas and his army of marauders continue their lightning guerrilla raids into Roman territory. Since they started destabilizing crucial regions of the empire responsible for grain production, the price has been rising steadily in Rome. It is unknown whether these two events are linked, but this year, riots break out over the inflated prices of grain. Tiberius's hand is forced, and he decides to fix the price of grain for all purchasers to prevent the price from spiraling out of control, while also compensating the grain merchants with government subsidies. Emperor Tiberius is not only dealing with economic problems in Rome this year. His time in power has seen the Jewish people gaining a more prominent presence in the capital. In one instance, a quartet of Jewish con artists who had been expelled from Judea had taken up residence in Rome and scammed a prominent Roman matron out of money and other valuables, giving these Jews a bad name in the capital. Tiberius responds by ordering all Jews of military age to join the Roman military and expels the rest of the Jewish population from Rome on punishment of enslavement for life. Last year, we saw the Romans coming to an agreement with the Parthians, wherein they would remove Vonones I from the throne of Armenia. They took him into custody and have been holding him in Syria. This year, they decide to move him to Cilicia. Once there, he attempts to escape, but fails and is killed by his guards. The former king of the Parthian Empire and later king of Armenia has fallen far in the past 10 years and is now gone for good. His death and the now unchallenged position of Artabanus II at the head of the empire splits the Parthian nobility, since not all of them supported a new branch of the Arsacid family taking over the empire. Now let's check in on the saga between the heir of the Roman Empire, Germanicus, and his rival, Gnaeus Calpurnius Piso, who is the governor of Syria. Germanicus decides to travel from Syria to Egypt to visit the province, which is an important region for food production and has been experiencing famine. This is a controversial move, as since the time of Augustus, a rule has been in place prohibiting any high-level Roman official from entering Egypt without explicit permission from the emperor. Upon his return to Syria, he finds out that Piso had ordered the revocation of orders to the armies and cities that Germanicus had made before leaving for Egypt. In anger, Germanicus orders Piso to return to Rome, which is probably beyond his authority. In the midst of the feud, Germanicus falls ill and, while sick, accuses Piso of poisoning him, although Piso had left the province. Not too long after, the heir to the empire and popular commander dies. Several prominent Romans speculate about the sudden death and put the blame on Emperor Tiberius, suspecting he ordered Piso to poison Germanicus. Once the populace of Rome finds out about the death of the highly popular commander and noble, the panic and grief is immediate. At his funeral, there is abundant praise and reminders of his fine character, and a particular eulogy is given by Tiberius himself in the Senate. Now, Tiberius's biological son, Drusus, emerges as the heir apparent. He has seen some success while being stationed in Illyricum, but is not nearly as popular as Germanicus, and is well known for his quick and cruel temper, while also partaking in excessive alcoholic binges. To make matters worse for those around him, it seems as if his behavior is trending in the wrong direction as he ages. The Parthian Empire sees territory being lost on their eastern border this year. The Parthian satrap, which is their name for the governor of a province, named Gondophares, declares independence from Artabanus in the aftermath of the killing of Vonones I, and founds the Indo-Parthian kingdom. Artabanus and Gondophares most likely reach an agreement where the Indo-Parthians would not intervene in the affairs of the Arsacids in Parthia. The Indo-Parthians possibly retained Zoroastrianism as their prominent religion, which is the main religion of the Parthians, who they separated from. They retain some Greek influence as well, as Gondophares takes the Greek title of autokrator, meaning one who rules by himself. Further east in China, the new Chan Yu of the Xiongnu Confederacy is already bothering the unstable Qin dynasty. He orders a raid into Qin territory. But Wang Mang is not making matters any better for his increasingly unstable position as emperor. In response to the several agrarian rebellions ongoing in China, including the Lu Lin and Red Eyebrows rebellions in Shandong, he decides to raise taxes. This ends up enraging the rebels even more, and allows them to recruit more of the disaffected populace to their cause. Wang Mang refrains from sending in the massive imperial army and instead tries to take down the Red Eyebrows rebels with a local militia stationed in the eastern commanderies, but the emboldened rebel army dispatches them with relative ease. Now it's time for In Memoriam, where we look back on the lives of prominent figures who died in the year. Germanicus was born in Rome to the prominent father Nero Claudius Drusus, who was a renowned commander and politician. He was granted the title of Germanicus for his victories over Germanic tribes, which he passed down to his son, who accomplished great victories against them in his own right. Germanicus, who was the nephew of Tiberius, was adopted by him in 4 AD and became the heir to the Roman Empire once Augustus died. Germanicus was put in charge of the legions in Germania in 12 AD after Tiberius was sent back to Rome, and he found more and more success as the years went by. Germanicus avenged the great Roman defeat at the Teutoburg Forest by conducting raids on Germanic tribes and defeating his rival Arminius multiple times at the Battle of Aetas de Viso and the Battle of the Angravarian Wall in 16 AD, even seeing the reclamation of the coveted Roman standards which were lost at Teutoburg. He returned to Rome as a victorious commander at the height of his popularity and received a triumph for his achievements. Germanicus also held several high-ranking positions, including consul and commander of Roman forces in the east, where he was tasked with diplomatic and military duties. It was in the east where he finally died under mysterious circumstances. The Romans will have a hard time finding a beloved commander that they can turn to in the future in the aftermath of this tragic and sudden death. In North Africa, the rebel Tacfarinas has to manage the large quantity of plunder that he and his army have accumulated from looting Roman villages in North Africa. He takes his rebel army to the Roman client kingdom of Mauritania, where he establishes a new base of operations for further actions against the Roman Empire. Back in Rome, the Senate, which was outraged by the death of Germanicus the previous year, orders a trial of Piso for the supposed murder of the widely admired Roman commander. Emperor Tiberius, whose popularity has been greatly damaged throughout this whole affair, removes himself from the proceedings to ensure impartiality and disavows all knowledge of Piso's alleged conspiracy, while also not making one single attempt to aid the defendant in any way. The accusations against Piso are numerous, including insubordination, corruption, abandoning and re-entering a province, summary justice, among other charges. Seeing the desperate position he's been put into, Piso decides to take his own life with a blade prior to the trial being completed. After the trial concludes, although the murder of Germanicus was one of the accusations brought against him, he was only actually found guilty of abandoning and re-entering Syria without authorization to wage war, and for violating Germanicus's imperium. Although they were both of proconsular rank, his authority was less than that of Germanicus. The Senate has his property proscribed, forbids mourning on his account, removes images of his likeness, such as statues and portraits, and his name is erased from the base of a statue as part of his damnatio memoriae, meaning condemnation of memory. So, we'll leave it at that. Was Germanicus really murdered by Piso, or was Emperor Tiberius concerned about his nephew's growing popularity and really was the puppet master behind the scenes. Or maybe Germanicus just fell ill suddenly and died of natural causes, and Piso tragically died a truly innocent man? Or possibly another player behind the scenes took advantage of the situation to take out Germanicus? We will never know for certain. Moving on, over in northern India, approximately around this time, a general named Aspavarma takes control of the territory of Gandhara. Aspavarma belongs to the Apracha dynasty of rulers, known as the Apracha Rajas, who control land in northern India, with their capital located in Bajaur. These people are suspected to follow the Buddhist religion and have held power in the region since 52 BC. Continuing on with the decade of unrest in China, Wang Mang makes more controversial and desperate decisions. He makes a sudden change to his presumed heir by deposing Crown Prince Lin, based on the rationale that trouble would come from the fact that Crown Prince Lin was younger than his brother Lord An, and thus Lin should not have been Crown Prince in the first place, a decision that Wang Mang had made himself years earlier after deciding his son Lin was more capable than the older brother An. He grants his son, Lord An, the title of the Prince of Xingqian, and the younger Wang Lin the title of the Prince of Tongyang. Wang Mang changes his tactic to suppress the rebellions in his damaged Mandate of Heaven by constructing new ancestral temples to invoke aid from the supernatural. He announces a, quote, new beginning in order to conform to the Mandate of Heaven given through portents, unquote. These new measures do not seem promising in the least. And that completes the history of the second decade AD. If you're curious about what happens next, please like and subscribe to follow the series in the future.